So it's a bit of a challenge today to make the introductions, because the person I have to introduce makes very good introductions, right? So when he comes, he's the one doing the MC, he usually finds a lot of very interesting stuff to talk about, to tell about the speakers. So it's a bit of a challenge for me. It's a big responsibility also, because Eugene is a very influential person in my life. I met him when I first arrived to Sydney, like a bit more than 3.5 years ago, and he has been a great help, a great support for me to become a data scientist and establish myself in the profession, if I can say that. I consider also him, he has been my mentor, and I consider also my friend. So it's a bit of a big responsibility today. And why Eugene can make these very good introductions is because he's always able to see the potential and the good on the people he works with. And I think that a lot of the people in this room will have like similar experiences that I've had with him. He's not only a prominent data science in Sydney, and I would say internationally. I think he's much more than that. He's a bit of a Michelangelo of the data science, because he combines a lot of different interests and knowledge, and he develops a lot of different activities. He's not only doing a lot of training in statistics, R and machine learning and different specific topics in that discipline, but he's also involved in a number of different initiatives, like a company to model natural disasters, like is REASC, I think is the name, like Advantage Data, that it's another company in consulting analytics, like Aurum, I think is the one that does valuation of data, so he answers the question of how much is my data worth. And if you have got to know about AlphaZeta, guess who is the principal data scientist there? So it's kind of difficult to make him an introduction. So I will not pretend to do it. I will just give the stage to him, because probably you are here to hear what he has to say and not just be mumbling. So, Eugene Dubosavsky.
Well, thanks a lot for that. Introduction or non-introduction, Jose, that was the best non-introduction I've had. It was a non-introduction. And I still think I have time to recount a Jose story, because it's only fair. And the thing is, Jose had impressed me with his complete lack of attention in my predictive analytics class, combined with his own brilliance. Complete lack of attention, because he never really got how I taught k-fold cross-validation to work. Those of you who know k-fold cross-validation, the thing you don't do with k-fold cross-validation is take the resulting k models, turn them into an ensemble, and use them in a Kaggle competition, especially when you're doing that Kaggle competition with me. Except Jose was, and Jose did, and embarrassingly got a better result with any of the models I built. That's my Jose story.
86 out of 5,000.
Yeah. So yeah, that one never gets old. So I should say how happy I am to see so many familiar faces, so many friends here, and also so many people I haven't met yet, and I certainly look forward to it. Thank you all for continuing to make Data Science Sydney such a success. I'm not sure that this is the first week that we have two events. Is it the first? I think that's already happened, but this week we have two events. And on Thursday we've got a sponsored event with a presentation from DataRobot. So yeah, Data Science Sydney is moving well and truly to the point where we're going to have events every week, if not every day.
Technically, we've got the Data Visualization Sydney tomorrow as well.
That's tomorrow. Thanks, mate.
Just wasn't posted.
Okay, yeah. This is the first week that Data Science Sydney has 3 events, except one of them didn't get posted on the Data Science Sydney webpage. Subsequently, all visualization events should be. So, yeah, good news. Now, further deviation from my slides. Again, a habit of mine that most of you are familiar with, who've done my courses. I just want to get a little serious for a minute and set the context for what I'm about to present. And I just wanted to get something off my chest. I'm actually, okay, this needs context, so bear with me. I'm actually sick of hearing about data. I actually am. I think there is a cargo cultish obsession with the word data, and maybe data for its own sake, rather than with the point of having that data in the first place. See, I'd rather people were obsessed with decisions and the positive change, the success that results from using data. Data is useless without that. And I say that because I keep hearing people talking about how excited they are about data, how the focus is the data. I see data functions, I see data business units, but I don't see a whole lot of decisions, and I don't see a whole lot of change. I don't see a whole lot of transformation. I actually think data is there to do two fundamentally separate things, related and separate. And the first has to come before the second. And the first is to measure the most important things in the organization. So the first bit of data you want is the data that says, here's how stuff is going. Scorekeeping. Just a passive record of the important stuff, without fear of failure, without fear of favor, without political interference. Measuring the most important things. And then, and only then, there's the other use of data, which is to look for insights, to build models, to find ways to actually do better. So there's data to figure out how well you're doing, and then there's more data, and more analysis, I should say, to help you do better. And I'm afraid that what I see is an incredible focus on ostensibly the do better stuff that somehow never manages to do better, and very little real emphasis on the whole how are we doing measurement stuff. So, like the expectation setting, the context setting I want to place here is I am interested in measuring and improving the most important things in organizations. And easy as that sounds, and while you might think that if an organization has spent hundreds of millions of dollars and hired heaps of PhDs and has cutting edge vendors providing stuff, that's equivalent to solving those two problems, I've got some news for you, not necessarily. So the first point here is that I am, in this talk, interested in what are the most important decisions facing an organization, and how can those decisions be made more empirically and more rigorously. That's the first point. The second point I'll make is, for me, this whole big data thing is another fetish. I don't care how big your big data is. Very seldom is the biggest data set the most important data set. And as I'll be discussing in this presentation, I'll be discussing what I claim is the most important data in any organization. And it's also the ubiquitously available data in the organization. So interestingly enough, I'll be talking about data that every organization has or can very easily acquire. And I'll be talking about data that is, unlike all the other data sets, the most immediately, directly, and fundamentally relevant to making the most important decisions in the organization. And some of you with a strategy background may argue with me, but I am taking the definition of strategic to mean important in a sense of life or death, or fundamentally transformational, which has a small relationship to the word important in the status sense. So I don't care how much funding it gets, I care about the impact it has on the organization. That's my definition of strategic. So I'm talking about this mysterious data set that isn't that big in a sense, but is huge in its impact, in its importance, and its relevance. And I'm talking about using that data set to measure the most important thing in the organization, or rather specifically the performance of the most important performers in the organization. And I'm sorry to say this, but there is a hierarchy, and some people's decisions are more important than others. Everybody makes decisions of one kind or another, but there's one or two people in the organization who make transformational decisions for the organization, and there's other people whose decisions amount to budgets of $500. Sorry to say this, it's not a fair world, there is a hierarchy. And what's interesting is that we've got amazing tools for measuring the effectiveness of the $500 budget people and process workers and people who are working to well-defined spec and doing repetitive things. But we are far poorer in measuring the KPIs of the C-suite. I mean, how do we do it now? We link it to profitability or whatever, but do we really know that they were causally the reason that the company did so well, or are they just riding along on a bit of luck? So I'm going to give you a way of measuring the decision-making ability of the most important people in the organization, and basically their ability to make the most important decisions in the organization. That's the measurement bit. I'm also going to present you with a way of improving those decisions, and two ways of improving them. One is a process that's provably not a bad thing to do, all things being equal. And another thing is an ongoing process of improving that. So there'll be quite a bit to talk about. So we're talking about letting an organization make better decisions. This is also, as you'll see, a data fusion technology, because it takes all the analytics you've got and all the qualitative decision making you've got, indeed any decision making you've got, and fuses it into a decision. And until human beings are completely replaced by AIs, and while there are still things that human beings do better than AIs, and the higher you go in the organization, the less relevant AI becomes. All this talk about being replaced by AIs, it's actually repetitive process work, let's face it, for the most part. As we go up the ladder, more and more relevant this technology becomes. So I'm leading up to something rather big, I hope. Let me start getting into the weeds shortly. Jose's said a fair bit about the various badges there, and poor old Aurum, the data valuation company, doesn't have a badge. Advantage Data, my own sort of boutique consulting company with Damon and Theo, that's got a badge. Alpha Zeta, and by the way, Alec, the Australia head of Alpha Zeta, where are you, Alec? Put your hand up. If anyone's looking for a freelance career in data science, talk to Alec. Reask, Theo mentioned, and you're going to be hearing a lot more from Reask. Probably of all of the companies I'm associated with, the one with the best marketing, the slickest website, and deservedly so. Where's Thomas? That guy, he's amazing. There's only about 3 other companies of this kind in the world, and none for this region, and none of them have us. None of them have our machine learning. So we're taking on the world here. And of course, Prescient. So those of you who haven't done my machine learning courses, you should do it about 5 times each, right? I'll give you a discount on the 4th one, I promise. So contact details on the slides. My general policy with slides is, if you want my slides, get in touch and ask me for them. That usually, why do I do that? Because that makes it a little bit harder, and it sort of increases the likelihood you'll actually read them. You invest some effort in getting them, you might actually look at them. So I've got all my contact details there. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about. Oh, and to Sarah's growing frustration, there's Sarah. It's now time to thank Sarah. So I'm still going off script, Sarah, but I now need to go off script some more. So I'll be talking about something called System 2. And System 2 is a tool that I've been developing for about 10 years now, but I'd be lying grossly if I said I've been developing it alone, and an absolutely pivotal workhorse of the System 2 development project. The lead engineer of the System 2 development project is Luke Prokaska right here. More on Luke later if I can think of some embarrassing stories. And with Luke, there are lots of embarrassing stories. More to the point, with minimal embarrassment and maximum credit, Sarah once again. So last time I presented the quantum computing course, Sarah had prepared the slides and subsequently taught the quantum computing course. So the very first Prescient quantum computing course ran thanks to Sarah. And further on, she has created the slides for this talk as well. Thank you very much, Sarah. Big hand for Sarah and for Luke. So now, Sarah, I'm in the slides. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the definitional stuff of what the heck I mean about what is a decision, what is strategic decision making, and how do I define decisions in a rigorous, measurable context. But while defining them in this rigorous, measurable context, I don't think I'm constraining it in any way. In fact, I'll challenge you to produce any meaningful kind of decision that doesn't fall into this context. I'll then talk about some examples of decision making, the importance of important decision making, why strategic decisions fail, and the sort of challenges they present. And point 2 is where I'm really going to get into the weeds of what we mean by making a decision in a very rigorous sense. And once again, I challenge you to tell me, no, it's not like that at all. My answer will be, that's because what you're describing is a sloppy version of this process, but you're still describing this process. And then I'm going to talk about ways of doing this better, ways of doing this empirically, ways of turning this into data that can be leveraged, data that can be turned into KPIs, data that can be turned into better decisions, and some next steps and challenges. 40 minutes is nowhere near enough time to give this topic justice, but let's see how we go. And I've already eaten up about 10 doing my wandering about. So, what do we mean by a decision? Well, a decision is a choice. I'm defining a decision as a choice among several options, and all the anyone here in touch with Peppa Pig? Got little kids, watch Peppa Pig. Anyone here know the phrase clever clogs? What's her name? Elmer Elephant? I'm clever clogs. So those of you who are clever clogs, mathematicians, will say, well, a decision can be a choice among several options, but they could be infinite, unaccountably infinite. Absolutely true. Still several options. But what are strategic decisions? Let's be practical here and get out of clever clogs territory. Strategic decisions are generally longish term. They're not 1 second away. They're not 1 day away. They're usually weeks, months, sometimes years away. They're complex. Every strategic decision is different. If you're making exactly the same decision every month or every week, that's an important decision, but it's not a strategic decision. So if you're deciding every week what the sales target should be, that's an important thing, but that's not a complex strategic decision. And by the way, with deciding things that you do repeatedly, that's where data analysis of the traditional kind that you all know and love can help, right? Because we've got a time series, we've got regular data. It's when you're making one-off decisions, like, do we, put Death Ray on our new phone and color it purple?
I'd buy that.
I'm testing the market. The response is positive. These sort of complex decisions, we don't have a time series of previous Death Ray phone releases. It's a complex one-off decision that we desperately need to make, but the traditional methods are really going to fail. And while we're not completely lost, and yes, there are complex methods we can use. We can do choice modeling, we can do structural equations modeling, we can look at customer data. Data isn't useless, but data is not going to deliver us the answer to this specific question. Data is not going to give us unambiguously yes or no, we should or shouldn't do this with the phone as opposed to that. Strategic decisions are made by the decision makers, the people guiding the organization or the business unit. The people actually be responsible for the well-being of the entity that they're guiding by making decisions for it, and these decisions have consequences for that unit or that organization. So some examples of good decisions, like Domino's Pizza choosing to focus their dollars on acquiring more online sales instead of business as usual, or Netflix focusing on online content delivery and e-commerce business instead of being a video store. Remember video stores? Me neither. And of course, I do. Work on that. And of course, not all decisions are great. Just because it's strategic doesn't mean it's good. In fact, you wonder how many people got away with a good paycheck for making the sort of decisions that Kodak made, for example, way back when. So you need to be making good strategic decisions when you're setting a company up in the first place and doing it to disrupt an industry and break competition. When you want to differentiate yourself in a competitive market, I think the term competition is key. Strategic decisions matter when they matter, and they matter when you're in an adverse situation. When living is easy and your biggest problem is to get 20% growth instead of 15% growth, I don't think you're under the same pressure to make good decisions. But when you have competitors, when you have a changing environment, when you are being disrupted, when there are legal or economic or technological factors, changing the ground under your feet, and you can't see more than a month ahead, that's the other thing. There's always this uncertainty, and change always comes with a certain fog. This is where strategic decisions really matter. And when you get them wrong, they can be really bad. They're gambles. So strategic decisions are really like gambling, and this is an important point. You're taking a bet. You're either winning big or you're losing big. And good decision makers are gamblers. And when I say they're gamblers, I don't mean they're irresponsible. I mean they're facing uncertainty with a relatively high chance of loss, but they're trying to systematically make decisions so they succeed more than they fail. And no one expects to succeed all the time, by the way. That's just silly. So it turns out that most strategic decisions are destined to fail, according to an article that supports that controversial point. So I'll just say, hey, I'm happy with that. Thanks, Sarah. Most strategic decisions are destined to fail. Organizations can be strategically misaligned. They can be just pointed in the wrong direction and doing everything perfectly, executing perfectly to drive themselves perfectly into the ground. They can have a very poor decision-making culture. Now, this one I love to talk about. So back to strategic misalignment. Their strategy is actually the thing you do, not the propaganda that you spread around. Strategy is not a slogan. Strategy is not the thing to get everyone excited. In fact, a really good strategy might even be secret. Strategy should be the opposite of propaganda. Strategy should be the thing you really want to happen, not the thing you want everyone to think about happening as it happens. And if you don't understand the difference, well, we can have a chat. In fact, you can also have strategic misalignment when you have a whole bunch of executives looking after their own careers, not really the organization's well-being. What's interesting is that can happen without them even realizing they're doing it. In fact, most people think they're just being good executives by promoting themselves to each other. And like you have a marketing department that excels in marketing two things: themselves and the discipline of marketing, rather than marketing product. But they're very good at marketing the idea that they're marketing product. I'm not saying all or any marketing departments. I'm not. Whoa. I'm not slamming marketing, but I'm saying, look, there are bad data scientists out there too. But I'm saying a bad marketing department uses its powers for evil. Imagine what a bad data scientist using their powers for evil is like. Wow. That's for another talk. How to maybe. So you can have a misalignment of incentives. You can have a complete disinterest in or a lack of strategy. I think that it's usually an incentives breakdown, and that's a whole conversation in its own right. And those of you who went to my management and strategy stream, I had a lot to say about that. There may also be a poor decision-making culture, often, by the way, a symptom of the first point, where you don't have a decision-making purpose, and either by sort of geological accretion or by design, no one actually owns responsibility for decisions, and politically astute people are very good at assigning blame or taking credit when appropriate, but everybody feels safe and included by no one in particular being the responsible decision maker. In fact, you also have what I've seen, you have CEOs and chief executives who, when pressed, say, well, why aren't you looking at data? Well, I'm too important to look at data. What the hell does that mean? You're too important to make decisions? Well, frankly, yes. What's your job? Well, to be important and to inspire people and to give talks and collect lots of money. Okay, fine. But this sort of aristocratization leaves no one in charge. It's like there's no adult in charge. There's no one making serious decisions. No one with the sufficient empowerment to make a serious decision stick. There are a whole lot of people who wish a serious decision was made, but they don't have the power to carry it through. The people with the power don't want to make decisions or don't think it's their job. And the decision-making process itself, trivially, almost always, is politicized in big and small ways. The loud people, the powerful people, the aggressive people, the people who are very good at saying the sky is green because that's convenient for me right now, they often get their own way, right? And they're also the sort of people who, because they need the sky to be green, don't really want the data to be there that says that the sky is blue because that's inconvenient at this point. So So poor decision-making culture means means things fail. And again, that relates to other things I've already mentioned, which is weak leadership and poor governance. So, we talked about leaders who don't want to lead. We talk about leaders who just want to, be liked by everyone because that's how they got promoted. Having allies, having a cohort of support is very important. And not having that feedback loop, not having measurement of the most important things in the organisation and the performance of the most important people in the organisation, there's no accountability. There's no real way to test whether these people are adding value. So received wisdom says they must be adding value because they're so expensive and they look so good in suits and they present so well. So let's talk about why the strategic decision-making business is actually hard. Now, I've mentioned the fact that even with traditional methods, with statistics, can you believe we live in the world where I'm referring to machine learning as a traditional method? Welcome to the world where random forest is almost 20 years old, folks. But you can't machine learn your way towards strategic decision making. You just can't. You might be able to machine learn your way towards supporting part of one decision, but you can't machine. At the point at which we can machine learn strategic decisions, human beings will have no jobs. This may be science fiction land, and it's a singularity, folks. And there is data. It's not like there is no data, because people make decisions. There are good decision makers out there, but those good decisions are made with data that is in people's heads. And what is this data? Yes, it is their accumulated experience. It is their hunches. It's the inside information they acquire. It's the human pattern recognition that very, very clever and insightful and experienced people have when they pull together some seemingly unrelated points and spot a trend or a pattern or a fact before anybody else does. It's also the human ability to take a fact or take an insight and turn that into an action, or turn that into a direction, turn that into a decision. So there is amazing data, but it's inside people's heads. And a topic that I'm going to be bringing up much more forcefully is forecasting. So everything I'm talking about now, the strategic decision-making business, is, I claim, and I will vociferously defend, inseparable from the idea of forecasting. And parking for now how that connection works, I'll say this, that however, if we accept that forecasting is important, I'll explain it. Forecasting rare decisions is hard because we don't have that time series of the number of times we got acquired by that company. We only have one instance of deciding whether we want to be acquired by this company or whether we want to acquire that company. We don't have the nice independent, identically distributed, set of 300 data points that we can use a random forest or something to build a model of. We just don't. So we're talking about one-offs. We're talking about things that conventional modeling just cannot help us with. And now I want to zoom in on what the heck do I mean by a decision. And I have another bad habit, which I hope you'll forgive me, which is I like to talk about absolutely obvious things. I like to start with the bleeding obvious, because it's only when you start with the bleeding obvious that you can then evolve it to something that's less obvious that people don't realize. And the bleeding obvious thing I'm going to talk about is what the heck is a decision, okay? And the decision is, well, a decision is when, well, it's choosing to do one of several possible things. Back to our little slide at the beginning, it's which door do I go through? So opening any one of these doors is an action. So there's any number of actions we can take. But the interesting thing is that there's a second level of complexity, because whichever action we choose to take, each action can result in a set of outcomes that we care about. So if we're a company, the outcomes we might care about are things like getting deregistered or delisted, or losing a lot of money, or profit, or steady as she goes, or growing market. So generally speaking, just to tighten it up, what you want are a set of relevant, exhaustive, and mutually exclusive outcomes. What does that mean? That means each of those outcomes needs to be something you care about. No two outcomes can occur together. You can only have one outcome, and one outcome must occur. Okay? So I would say that implicitly any decision you make in your life is already like that. You have an action, once you've chosen an action, it can have these outcomes. Now, I would say that to be wise, to make decisions well, is to have a good idea of the probabilities of the outcomes given that action. Okay, so now we're getting into the statistical weeds, some of you are thinking, but too bad. The future is uncertain, and the language of uncertainty is probability theory. So what this slide is saying is that not only do your outcomes come in different colours, what does that mean, Sarah? No, it's not about the colours. Your outcomes have different probabilities. Some things are more likely than others. So again, I'm not telling you something you didn't already know, except I will say this. A lot of ostensible or actual decision makers will already hate me at this point. They'll hate me because I'm using the P word. I'm being technical. I'm talking about probability. I'm doing that horrible thing of not storytelling to them in the language of management. Because in the language of management, there's no such thing as maybe. There's no such thing as we don't know what's going to happen, but there are different shades of maybe. Well, I'm sorry, that's how the real world works. And I'll tell you something else about the real world. In about 10 years' time, you're going to be as unlikely to find an executive who doesn't understand those probabilities as you are now to find an executive who can't read or count. Seriously. Probabilistic literacy is the next revolution in executive literacy. Mark my words. And the reason is because decisions require you to think probabilistically. And it's when you think probabilistically and you see that every action results in a set of outcomes and probabilities, that you start thinking about decisions as choosing among a set of actions where, hey Sarah, why are the probabilities all the same? Where, forgive the probabilities all being the same, but other than that, what you usually have, pretend it's slightly different. You will have different probability distributions for the same outcomes. And what does that mean? Well, you're going to pick the action with the greatest probability of good things happening and the lowest probability of really bad things happening. Now, what does best mean? Obviously, you need to come up with your own metric. I mean, you might be extremely risk averse, and any probability at all of organisational ruin, you don't want to go there, even if it means more profit. Or you may be more aggressive and you may be interested in the one that gives you the greatest probability of profit. That's up to you. How your utility works relative to this probability distribution is up to you. But the point is, all strategic decision making is this. And any strategic decision maker who doesn't understand this picture is still doing this. They're just doing it instinctively. Just like bookies who don't understand probability theory are instinctively doing regression modeling in their heads. Did you guys know that? Bookies actually instinctively do regression modeling of an approximate kind. And all decision making is like this. But the beauty is, if we look at it explicitly, if we look at it formally, if we look at it rigorously, we can do several things. We can actually force people to go on the record with their decisions. We can force people to, first of all, we can encourage people to, first of all, enumerate what the likely outcomes are. What are the interesting, exhaustive, mutually exclusive set of outcomes that we care about? That's interesting. A lot of people don't even think about that, right? What's our set of possible actions? A lot of people don't think about that either. And then to articulate what is the probability distribution for those outcomes. And by the way, there's another way to view this. What is this? This is a forecast. These are conditional forecasts. So we're forecasting the future here. The reason we're using probability distributions is because the future is uncertain. The future is the thing that hasn't happened yet, and anything can happen. But it's also a conditional forecast because we've got 4 conditional forecasts, 1 conditional on each action. So my claim to you is that all decision making, and particularly strategic decision making, is a set of conditional forecasts on a set of exhaustive, mutually exclusive outcomes. Now, I will, as I said, Please argue with me because that's how I learn, but I'm fairly confident you're not going to beat me on this one. This is what decisions are, I think. That's just your opinion, Eugene. So each outcome is associated with a probability of success and thus a probability distribution. Now, the thing is that the person, the decision maker in a market, let's say all organizations are doing this, and all organizations are. They might be doing it badly, but all organizations are. The one that's doing this best, the one with the best estimates of these probabilities as they work in the real world, is the one that wins. Just like the bookie with the best estimate of the probabilities on the horses wins. The best forecast is the one that gets the probabilities right. Now, it's a long conversation for noobs, and it's even an interesting conversation with seasoned data scientists to talk about what you mean by getting a probability distribution right, because only one of those things will actually happen, right? What does it mean to say, saying this was 60% right was correct, and saying this was 10% right was wrong? Well, put it this way. It's probably...
There's that word again.
Probably wrong to say that it's impossible that it snows tomorrow, right? But it's a very, very, very high chance that it won't. And more to the point, what's the weather like? Can I see stars? I think if I said there's about a 50% chance of rain.
That's the bureau.
Well, look, if I said there's about a 0.2% chance of it being 40 degrees tomorrow, you're more likely to think I'm right than if I said there's a 90% chance of it being 40 degrees tomorrow. There is such a thing as the probability of being correct. Does that make sense? Even though tomorrow it's going to be some range of temperatures and not another. So there is this idea of probabilities being right, and there is this idea of forecasts being probabilistic. And if we get these probability estimates right and make our decisions on the basis of these probability estimates, well, I was quoting a particular South Park episode which involves gnomes and where the punchline is profit. It's a similar sort of situation. No South Park fans, it's terrible. So here is my version of the South Park gnomes process. Everyone knows what I'm talking about?
Underpants.
I didn't want to say it. So the point is you have a set of decisions to be made, and the idea is to ask influencers, and I don't just mean the active decision makers, but anybody who has wisdom, anybody who has insight into the decision, ask them to make a probabilistic call about the outcome of each possible action. Then your chief decision maker, possibly the CEO, possibly not, looks at the aggregated estimates. So wisdom of crowds effect. We collect data by surveying human beings. We turn these human beings' brains into data without using mind probes. So no junior executives are harmed during the making of this presentation yet. But we survey them for their rigorous probabilistic estimates of the outcomes of various actions. We pull their estimates and we have a decision. Now, what's interesting is that this process has been researched. And on the whole, this process tends to do a whole lot better than picking any one of those people randomly. You'll also be surprised by which people do consistently well. Because once you go through this process many times, people start developing a track record. You can see who is systematically more accurate and who is less systematically less accurate. And what's that? That is the most relevant KPI in the organization. That is a strategic decision-making effectiveness KPI for every actual or potential decision maker. Can everybody say political nightmare? So, a maxim is that we do need to use that data better to improve current decision-making process. And as I've said, the most important data in the organization is the tacit data, the unrealized data in the heads of key stakeholders. And to improve this decision-making process, we need to access this tacit data, but we need to do one more thing. We need to do one more thing. We need to give these people an incentive for getting these estimates right. We need to make them accountable, and we also need to give them a reason to participate in this process and to participate to the best of their ability. Are there humane ways of doing this? So once again, what can we do? Well, we can make the decision. We find the people who understand the outcomes. They're informed and incentivized now. We survey them, and we feed back the incentives as we should. And in fact, the incentives is where it gets really interesting, because when you think about it, normally you come here and you see machine learning methods where you have a bunch of models, and the question is how to get all of these models working. Well, imagine having Amazon cores where you have to convince the Amazon cores to do something. Instead of writing a whole bunch of code, you now have to find some sort of bribe. You have to incentivize. But every person is now your model. We're really talking about doing ensemble machine learning on people. So this is, I think, the data science takeaway idea here is this is ensemble machine learning on people to build these distributions. And the other thing that you're doing, the thing you're doing straight away, just stepping back from this idea that, hey, these are wisdom of crowds predictions that have, on the whole, better merit than typical run-of-the-mill prediction. That's a contentious claim. I need to throw some literature at you. But consider the following: how do the C-suite, or how do the seniors of an organization arrive at a consensus? How do they go, what do we think about this? Well, they'll hire out some expensive place in the Blue Mountains. They'll spend half that time playing golf and riding zebras or something. And then they'll all get together and they'll all yell at each other, and the most important people will get their way. Sounds good? Fine. Well, how about a process that completely depoliticizes this and gives you an objective, measurable, holistic picture of the consensus of all key stakeholders in 5 minutes, and does not in any way favor the hippos, the highly paid people and their opinions. How about something that sounds a bit like nirvana, doesn't it? Well, you get this consensus. You also get to see where there is any discord. You get to see where there's any division of opinion. You get to see where there isn't settlement on a clear consensus. And as I said, completely depoliticized. And when you start taking a track record, the hippos get hit twice, right? Because if they're an insightful hippo, that's great. But if they're a hippo with a lousy track record, well, that's known. And it's like, okay, well, everybody gets a say, but why should we listen to Mr. 0 out of 10 here? So it's for all of these reasons that I've built over the last 10 years a piece of software that I call System 2. Now, I can't claim that this is entirely, or even at all, almost, an original idea. I think some of my interpretations may be original, but the method is not. So this wisdom of crowds idea is actually a simplification of the first thing Luke and I tried. And I should also mention one more person who I should say is the most articulate and one of the most visionary people in the data science field in Australia, and that's of course Stephen Samwell, who unfortunately can't be here today. So me, Stephen and Luke were working on System 2 way back when. And originally we wanted System 2 not just for organizations, but I still think it has a role in changing politics, in creating an objective way of making pundits and journalists and academics and all sorts of busybodies accountable. Because it's all well and good to have political opinions, but what's your track record? And A, what are you actually proposing? You can't have it both ways. And B, what's your track record with what you've been proposing? Have you been right? So, I'm not going to go too much into System 2. I may do another talk where I go to actually show you the software. And in fact, I'm keen to get feedback on whether people are interested in this. But I'm now going to give you an example of this sort of collective decision making in action. And I'm going to talk about an organization that I used to like. I used to be a great fan of an NGO called the Galactic Rebel Alliance. I have since found that their competition pays better and has better uniforms. So I'm very much an Empire man these days. But I'll
Trader.
yes. Look, credit where credit is due. I think the Alliance is a fantastic organisation. They've got some great, inspiring, energetic people working for them. Don't you love the things people say about organisations that don't really want to work for you? But I want to use an example that's close to my heart, which was a foundational experience for me as a data scientist, because I hadn't quite started my data science career. In fact, truth be told, I couldn't even speak English properly yet. I was a 9-year-old Russian kid, recently arrived refugee, and I got to see Star Wars in 1978. It was amazing. So I'm going to talk about a formative event for me, which was, of course, the Battle of Yavin. So who's seen Star Wars? Well, A New Hope. So the very first film, Star Wars 4. An embarrassing lack of hands goes up. Okay. All right, you're all. I'm going to lose.
In a galaxy far.
Okay, so long time ago in a galaxy far, far away with fake space buns on Princess Leia there, who sadly passed away last year. The Galactic Civil War is on, and the Rebel Alliance base on the planet Yavin 4. It's actually not a planet; it's a moon orbiting a gas giant planet. Sarah, is on high alert because the Death Star is approaching. And what's the Death Star? Well, I'll tell you what it's not. That's not a moon, that's a space station. And there is a key decision maker. There's a level-headed, passionate decision maker. If you read some of the canon literature, she got her PhD in something or other at the age of 18, and she was, of course, a galactic senator as well as a princess, and hey, also one of the two Skywalker family wonder twins, though she didn't realize it at this stage. That's Princess Leia Organa.
Talk about spoilers.
Now, the thing is, she has some very, very important decisions to make, because the Death Star apparently has the ability to wipe out whole planets. In fact, she knows because her home planet of Alderaan just got zorched. Just to make a point, I didn't say the Empire was nice, I said they're efficient. So she needs input from informed stakeholders. So here's the situation. Here comes the Death Star. So there you see the Death Star approaching Yavin 4, approaching the fourth moon of Yavin. And as the Death Star approaches, the rebels have their little meeting and they agree on the following set of exhaustive, mutually exclusive outcomes. The first one is nothing's going to happen, we're going to be fine. There'll be no attack on Yavin 4 whatsoever. Outcome 2 is, yeah, there'll be an attack, but we'll be fine. Maybe we'll fight them off. Maybe they'll miss. Maybe it's just a show of strength. Maybe we'll arrive at some sort of negotiated settlement, and everything will be fine. The third option is that the base is actually attacked with significant damage. There's a serious battle on, but it's not a world ender. And the fourth is that, in fact, the Empire is very thorough and they destroy the base. But this whole idea of a moon/space station destroying a planet, that's hogwash. Ain't gonna happen. And of course, scenario 5 is nope, Yavin 4 is gone. So these are the five exhaustive, mutually exclusive outcomes. Now, those are the outcomes. What should the rebels do? And now everybody gets together and agrees that there are basically 3 possible schools of thought, and they arise from basically three strategic views. Obviously, they don't want their base destroyed. No one wants their base destroyed. There's agreement on that. And they figure out that the popular actions are, first of all, to send the entire fleet of X-Wing fighters. So those are the fighters that Luke Skywalker flies in. And that's an X-Wing because when it goes into battle, its wings are shaped like an X. And that's called the Y-Wing because it actually isn't shaped like a Y. I have no idea why they're called Y-Wings, but there you go. The Y-Wings are bombers. They're heavy bombers, they're older craft, and if you saw the film, well, it's a shame. I really like those things. So the idea is to send the bombers and the fighters to protect the bombers and hopefully take the Death Star out. It's like all out assault on the Death Star with the hope of taking out if you remember the Achilles heel of the Death Star, the thermal exhaust port. Who designed that?
Management.
This will take a while to recover. Option 2 is a little bit more conservative. Option 2 says, look, it's a bit silly sending the fighters because A, I think you're exaggerating the threat. B, if you've been watching the Star Wars Rebels series, you know that the Y-Wings are just superb and they can just blow the crap out of anything on their own. So we just send the Y-Wings, and if what worries us is that the Imperials are going to launch all their fighters from the Death Star, and we need our fighters to protect the base. So we'll just send the Y-Wings. There's option 2. And option 3, which I've got demonstrated nicely with the Death Star blowing something up, is do nothing. Now, why would we do nothing? We do nothing because we don't believe this whole Death Star thing, it's hogwash, or we believe in diplomacy. You know, we've worked in the US State Department and we believe that negotiation can solve everything. In fact, well, negotiation is the most important thing in its own right. So these are the 3 options. Send everything, send just the bombers, or do nothing. And then we have a whole bunch of different folks who, why is Mon Mothma a space smuggler, Sarah? Mon Mothma's changed careers. Maybe this is how she's getting off the... Mon Mothma's actually the leader of the rebellion, it's called.
That's what it says.
That's what it says.
Does it?
Yeah, it's 2 columns.
Oh, 2 columns. Oh, thank God. All right, so these are our key stakeholders. And the thing is, they range from very, very central figures like Princess Leia and Mon Mothma, who's the head of the rebellion and not a space smuggler like Chewbacca at all. Sorry, Sarah. And generals like Jan Dodonna and Calliste Rykian, they're two of the generals. Also some of the pilots who'd be doing the fighting, like Wedge Antilles and of course Luke Skywalker and good old Porkins. Who can forget Porkins? No, boom. You know the scene. And of course Admiral Akbar. Now, just because Admiral Akbar wasn't in the movie doesn't mean he wasn't there talking and listening. And of course people like C-3PO, who are very, very good at estimating probabilities of death, which are usually very high, if you remember. C-3PO is a big pessimist. So they all have their perspectives, and in fact I gave them specific perspectives. Like you'll find that Mon Mothma, actually being a politician, even though she's head of the rebellion, she has a view that, you know, maybe negotiation is the way. So she thinks the worst thing we can do is send the Y-Wings, because they'll just get blown to hell. But if we do nothing, there's a chance we can negotiate our way out of it. And if we send everything, we could maybe survive, but probably not likely. One of the generals is really gung-ho. The other general thinks, oh, we're dead anyway, but, you know, better to send everything. And of course, you know, Han Solo thinks it's all done for. The X-Wing pilots just want to go in there and blow things up. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has an opinion, and what we're going to do is say that there are 3 conditions or 3 decisions, and 5, for each decision, 5 possible outcomes. Now, I want you to consider this in another context. So, back to advanced data analytics. For me, the most advanced bit of advanced data science is actually causal inference. And what we're doing here is actually of a very different kind, causal inference. We are directly estimating the probabilities of outcomes based on actions that we will take. So this is a very, very different way to do the kinds of things that people do with causal inference methods as well, FYI. And that, by the way, is the Rebel Alliance flag, an organization I used to be very fond of.
725.
Huh?
725.
Almost there. So this is a quick view of the interface of the System 2 interface. Like I said, this isn't going to be a System 2 talk, but maybe those of you coming for drinks, I might show you off the System 2 in the pub. I might even start a separate System 2 interest group if people really are interested. Let me know in the comments to this event, by the way, if people want to hear more about System 2. So the way System 2 works is you have a number of sliders, and the sliders always add up to 100%, so you just move one slider up, the other sliders move down.
You're up to 99 there.
Huh?
Comes to 99.
The top is 99.
Oh, no, I'm right. You're sorry, Mike.
Right. Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Now, it actually spits out data I did some data analysis. I used another one of my tools. I used ggRaptor in R. I was able to grab the data from System 2. I didn't plan it to do this. I grabbed the data in System 2 and produced this, which is the results, in about 30 seconds. ggRaptor for System 2, gold. The Rebel Alliance uses Python. As you can see, there is actually incredible discord on the question of will the Yavin 4 base be destroyed. There is an incredible lack of disagreement, but nevertheless, what you can see is that on the whole, there is a much lower mean level of expectation for the base to be destroyed, and everybody is quite pessimistic, but the least likely is if they buckle up and send all the fleet. So you can see that the probabilities of destruction go up, but the probability of total and utter destruction goes down, and also the probability of everything turning out to be fine is also improved if you send everything. So it may be a little bit hard for you to see this straight away. I'll probably want to simplify this presentation a bit, but just first by looking at this, which is the probability that Yavin 4 is destroyed, this color here, you can see that the hump here is way lower than it is here or here. Do nothing is a good way to get destroyed. Send the Y-wing, should be Y-wings, my fault, this is my fault. Send the Y-wings only, they still have a high chance of being destroyed. Sending the entire fleet, that is the key. And indeed, that's what happened in the movie, and guess what? It wasn't Yavin 4 that got destroyed, it was the Death Star. Well, it's okay, it's the Empire, they can build more. Now, interestingly, the System 2 just produces all of that data. It's fantastic data, it just gets produced and you can do all sorts of things with it, and I didn't even need to put it through dplyr for transformation. I just threw it straight into ggRaptor, and it did everything it had to do. The most important thing is the record of the value for each outcome. So you basically have a table of outcomes. Data set is pretty cool.
Was that Excel?
Huh?
Was that Excel on the previous slide?
Was that Excel?
That was Google Sheets.
Google Sheets, there you go. So the point is that we can use this tool to identify high-performance decision makers. And it doesn't matter what their rank is. The people who keep getting this right, and we can use various measures that really accentuate whether people are getting probabilities right and whether people are generally beating other participants. It measures it's a KPI for measuring strategic decision making. Now, every person has that KPI, the collective has the KPI as well. So when I make the claim that the collective does better, well, you can test that. And if your collective isn't doing better, that's fine too, because you can adjust it like a neural network. You can actually change the weights of individuals based on their performance in the past. It's like a gradient descent algorithm for a single neuron in the simplest case. This promotes much more sensible decision making, and as discovered recently, a book called Super Forecasters came out, written by Philip Tetlock, one of my intellectual deities that inspired this work to some extent, along with Robin Hanson and David Kahneman. In fact, why did I call it System 2? David Kahneman. I think you'll find that there are ways for people to improve as predictors and therefore as decision makers. People can get better at this. There are techniques they can follow, there are methods they can acquire to get better at this, and I'm looking at teaching them in upcoming courses. Now, the whole point of this is also to depoliticize the decision-making process. If you want a decision-making process that's on the one hand measurable, on the other hand better by that measurability, and thirdly, not influenced by untoward incentives, this is how you do it. This is how you depoliticize it. Of course, just about everybody you show it to with sufficient budget will smile and probably not want it precisely because of the good it does. Which is an interesting effect that Robin Hanson found recently, Robin Hanson being the inventor of prediction markets. And he's actually made a study of self-deception and people's real incentives. There's a very interesting podcast interview of Robin Hanson and by Sam Harris, very recently done on Sam Harris's Waking Up podcast. And what was interesting for me, apart from the rest of the content on self-deception, was when Robin Hanson said that he was interested in this topic because he couldn't understand why people weren't genuinely interested in prediction markets and the value they bring to decision making. Why didn't people care about better decision making? So please do bear that in mind. This whole idea of this changing the world, this will only change the world if people genuinely care about better decision making. They'll say they care, but actually caring is not a given. So there are challenges due to politics. There are questions. How do you start it? How do you incentivize it to continue? How do you give people skin in the game? How do you make them want to participate and participate well? And how do we set the right question? How do we set the right questions? Actually, asking the right questions becomes a much more important thing than answering them. The answering machine is already then in place, but the asking questions machine becomes the important one. So what we want in the end is to work in a company where decisions are defined, measured, improved, and depoliticized, and they're made by informed consensus, where decision makers are held accountable and measured, and on the other hand, any body of worth can become a decision maker. And aggressive, unaccountable manipulators are disempowered and identified, either through their poor performance or their non-participation. So I've probably gone way over time, but
There was no time for you.
Thanks.
David Digital, what is your last question?
Once again, a big thanks to Sarah for this presentation.
Thanks for the talk. I just had a quick question. You mentioned Philip Tetlock
Yes.
and super forecasters, which I was
Yes.
thinking of basically after halfway through.
Only halfway.
So,
What am I doing wrong?
not much. I think it's a good procedure. I was just looking at it. Some of the examples you gave at first, there were very dramatic examples, like basically not predicting the change in, say, the camera industry, or bringing out a new iPhone, etc. Like various industry changes, which some people might find obvious, but others either mistime them or make the decisions at the wrong moments. I was just wondering how you sort of take unintuitive decisions, which sometimes aren't going to be particularly easy for the crowd to decide on. Like, you never know what's going to take off when, and also whether you think a lack of diversity within the company may be a problem with taking the crowd wisdom, because if everyone's being hired sort of for the same attributes, which often they are in companies, whether that will affect it, as in super forecasters, they quite often take people with differing views and then combine their opinions together, whereas within a company they're mostly homogenous.
It's true. Which part is a question?
Just to clarify, how do you deal with that first, given that you're recommending a system where you take a whole...
Okay, the first bit or the diversity bit?
The diversity
Okay,
bit.
you asked two questions.
Yeah.
The first, you did ask two questions, and the first question is, the fact is that the black swans out there are total and utter unknowns. Okay, so what you're saying is, Eugene, you've presented this system, but there are some things it can't do. What's the point of it when it can't do certain things? That's what you're saying. Now, my answer is, well, no one can pick up black swans, no one. That's what a black swan is. Some things will blindside us, and they always do. My claim is that this will be better than what we're doing now. Also, what constitutes a black swan will move a bit. So to the extent that you do have people who might see the harbingers of certain things coming that are not visible otherwise, because you're right, some things really do blindside everyone, but some things blind Freddy could see, but for political reasons no one wants to acknowledge. So the thing is, when someone proposes a new thing, just like you said, the example I gave were very dramatic. In the real world, most decisions aren't that dramatic. Equally, I think this is nirvana. This is not going to bring about the kingdom of God on earth. You know, I simply think it'll improve the world dramatically. That's all. That's my only. I'm making a much more modest claim. I'm just saying this will change the world dramatically, but it's not going to make us all immortal. It's not going to make fairies fly, and it's not going to make us predict true black swans. But so improvement is not the same as perfection. That's the first part. Your point about diversity is absolutely correct. So I think that a diversity of viewpoints is key, and indeed I leave as an open question this idea that it's very fashionable at the moment to talk about diversity in hiring practice, but is the diversity that is sought the diversity that is needed? And you said yourself, it's a diversity of views, which it's an intellectual diversity, which is crucial. And what I also say about intellectual diversity is, intellectual diversity, yes, but there is still such an idea as being informed and relevant and right. So I want a diversity of, like, right and wrong are not a diversity. Different proximities of right are, if that makes sense. So if people are, even if you want you do want a diversity of views, you don't want people who are just completely disinterested and uninformed. And you also, what you don't want is a diversity of incentive. What you do want is everybody to get it right. That's something you don't want to diversify. Does that make sense? Yeah. You're just really lazy.
Can you describe how you avoid groupthink? Because how do you avoid groupthink with this? So if the CEO said, yeah, we need to do this, and all of his direct reports are going to toe that line and say, look, yeah, we're all going to predict this as well. How do you avoid that in your model?
Well, you've just described a situation where there's an incentive structure which incentivizes groupthink. Well, I would, first of all, try not to have that incentive structure. If the CEO wants to create a world where it looks like consensus is being formed, but actually anybody can be punished, identified and punished for not following the consensus, well, this model ain't going to work, is it? But there are ways not to do this. You do need, so I actually don't believe in bottom-up analytics. Unless you have people at the top who want to do this right, it's not going to work. So something I'm not a big fan of is this idea of let's build this wonderful grassroots rebellious thing that's going to force the senior executive to depoliticize. Ain't going to happen. But if you've got a senior executive, if you've got a CEO who says, I actually want to make better, I want this organization to make better decisions, or better yet, you have an owner-manager, you have a board who says this and mandates this and creates the appropriate incentives and protections, then it has a chance of working. Does that make sense?
I wanted to know about your plans to apply this to politics, because that sounds like it could be really interesting, and there could be that incentive from at least the pressure from everybody wanting the government to make better decisions to actually get this implemented.
Get in touch with me, and I'll send you a link to a paper by Robin Hanson called Futarchy. I actually think there is a chance to save democracy, but it's only by making it democracy squared. I believe that tyranny makes leaders unaccountable and unchangeable. Democracy creates a situation where leaders are accountable and are changeable. The problem with democracy is that the electorate isn't accountable, and the information transfer mechanism, the media, isn't accountable, and they have perverse incentives. Futarchy fixes maybe 1.5 of these problems, and it's a political philosophy written by Robin Hanson, who is also the creator of prediction markets. I'd be very happy to send you a link to that and other material.
Hi. Another question regarding how do you weigh specific opinions? For example, if you ask people that their department is impacted by the decision in a negative way potentially, or they fear they are impacted, do you say it's just they flow in the normal way, or do you put in a way or put them separate for separate view them with a separate perspective because they may rather vote for survival than for what's best for the company?
That's a very good question. I think it's a combination of, you may even preclude people who have a conflict of interest from having input at all. You may perhaps have a situation where they're not answering the question once but many times, and then you're weighing it by their track record. Basically, people who are skewing things towards what they want rather than towards what will happen are, well, they'll often be shown out over time. And you can change the weights of the system based on either your prior expectations of people's impact, or later their proven track record. But yeah, conflict of interest and an interest in gaming the system remains a threat.
Hi. How would you begin to quantify or give weight to the different points of view before making a decision? Is there like an outline to doing this, or a particular strategy to it?
I think you'll be disappointed. Look, at the moment, there's a sort of a second stage process by, have you ever heard of IARPA? You've heard of DARPA, the US Defense Research and Investment Arm. There's IARPA, which is the Intelligence Research Investment Arm. They're the ones who funded the project that led to Philip Tedlock's book Super Forecasters. But now there's a second phase of that project where the investigation is more into a more sort of explanatory approach to decision making, to understand the whys of decisions, not just the whats of decisions. The thing about this method is it's completely, it can be used to do knowledge management. It can be used to infer what were the views that led to a decision. But the truth is that it is, in its basic form, ruthlessly indifferent to the why. It doesn't care whether you're using astrology, or you're using Marxism, or you're using free market theory, or you're just guessing. It doesn't care where your ideas come from. What it cares about is whether you've got a good track record. So it's a bit like machine learning. Machine learning doesn't, if you read, it's a bit like, the analogy with machine learning is Leo Brayman's paper, The Two Statistical Cultures, where he says how traditional statisticians look at the very simple mathematical forms and how those mathematical forms are somehow explicitly, deliberately representative of the thing being measured. And he says, the hell with that, I'm just building things out of decision trees. I know that's not what the system looks like, but my models are more accurate. So I think the answer to your question has a machine learning analogy, which is Leo Brayman's Two Statistical Cultures. Read that paper. Yes?
Is the implication in your model here that when you first pose the question, each person who puts the input has an equal weighting, but then having made a decision, when you make the second decision, those who are more accurate the first time are more heavily weighted, and likewise with the third time, when you make a third decision looking back at the consequences of the second and first decision, those people in the input are again more highly weighted. Whereas now what tends to happen is the more scour in a hierarchy, the more highly weighting you're being given. Is that one of the implications of it? Is there a ex post facto element to your decision?
Absolutely. As I said, one of the byproducts of this process is a KPI, which is people's ex post facto performance. And you can use their track record, their performance, to weight their contribution to future predictions. So, absolutely.
And on an ongoing basis.
On an ongoing basis, and this is where you have an analogy of ensemble machine learning, where your models are people, and you're doing something like adaptive gradient descent over time. You're doing stochastic training on people on strategic decisions. Use it very much following the process you've just described, either heuristically or in a strictly mathematical way.
One more question, I think, over there.
All right. This guy.
Yeah, you got it very simple. It's you. Is that me? Yeah.
There was talk earlier about black swans and how sometimes people will pick up on a particular situation and not get recognised. Is there any facility here where you don't just track who makes decisions well, but they make particular types of decisions well.
Oh, yes.
You weight according to that.
Without a doubt. And Tetlock's first big book, Expert Political Judgment, talked about how there are effectively two main kinds of expert predictors. He calls them foxes and hedgehogs. And the foxes were eclectic, very careful eclectic thinkers who tended to, err on the side of everything's close to 50%. They never gave very high probabilities to anything, and they were never very sure, and they were never wedded to any particular idea or any particular ideology. The hedgehogs were absolute experts in one kind of reasoning, and they saw everything in those terms, and they were much more likely to make extreme predictions. And hedgehogs were hedgehogs like Richard Pipes, who predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union when no one else did. But the counter argument is, well, he was also incredibly wrong about a whole bunch of stuff, and perhaps Richard Pipes predicting the collapse of the Soviet Union was like a broken clock being right twice a day. So open debate. But there were people who seemed to be reasonably good or better at picking up these extreme events. And then with super forecasters, you're seeing the ability to identify consistently good predictors and actually improve their behavior as well. So put all that together and encourage a hedgehog to be a bit more informed and think in a more Bayesian way, and you might just get someone who's picking up outliers.
So do you have this built in, or is it planned for System 2?
Well, but the thing is, it's not technology. It's whoever is this is just a tool for collating those predictions and displaying them and calculating the outcomes and scoring and so forth and keeping a track record. Where your thinking comes from is up to you. There are plans to run training in decision making and forecasting and Bayesian thinking and so forth, which might make people better forecasters. In that respect, that's in development, but it's not part of the software, it's part of teaching.
But the software could keep track perhaps of what particular type of decision is being made.
Well, the software keeps track, the software keeps track of different kinds of, fair enough, yes, the software does keep track of different kinds of predictions, and the software has many different ways, different metrics of accuracy, and you can have a metric that looks at people's salience, how much more likely people are to put very high probability on something happening or not happening. You can also measure how unusual someone's predictive style is. So you can identify the people who are, on the one hand, reasonably correct, but on the other hand, very, very different from others. And that's the diversity point. You can actually measure, with track records, you can measure the diversity. And while you need to wait for an event to actually occur to see if people were right or not, as soon as people have made predictions, you can straight away see who's a conformist and who's making fundamentally different predictions to everyone else. So yeah, the interesting thing about diversity is that it's also measurable.
One final question from someone who had a slide that said you get one sentence and it is a question.
That's right. The bonus round question. I guess, yeah. To keep it simple, why did you call it System 2?
Because of Daniel Kahneman and first.
I know, but I guess then the follow-on would be just to completely be a hypocrite.
Because I hadn't heard about Stanovich before that, and this is before the replication crisis for Kahneman kicked in. If that's where you're driving.
That wasn't. I was going to say, I guess System 2, based on my understanding of it, is something similar to concentration. So when you actually think about, to an extent, about solving a problem. And could you not argue maybe that if you're using this as a decision-making tool at the higher levels of organization, those who are lower down would spend more time trying to improve their decisions?
Well, like I said, this doesn't preclude them participating. In fact, the beautiful thing about System 2 is it will identify the completely unexpected left field folk who are actually better predictors, and generally they are. It's usually very meek, considered people who aren't super aggressive, who tend to be better predictors than the loud aggressive ones, better decision makers than the ones that get to be decision makers. I don't want to confuse my comments about hierarchy in terms of having the power to make a decision versus having meaningful input. I think you can even have meaningful input outside of the organization. In fact, I think when this stuff catches on, our very idea of being a participant and being a shareholder will change, because I think, everybody's got a view on the future of Telstra, and a lot of people have meaningful views who are not employees of Telstra at all.
Announcement time. Go for it. 7:50.
Thank you.
Right, announcement time. I get to go first because I'm CDA and we're paying for the whole thing. So we have a lot of people here at CDA. We're the biggest company in Australia, depending on how you measure it. We have data scientists, data engineers, data analysts, pretty much everything, and we're always hiring for all of those positions. So we have me, if you want to talk specifically around data science and what that role entails at CDA, come have a chat to me. We've also got Liana up the front here. If you want to talk about just anything in general about working at CDA, knows all of the details about how you actually go through the process, which I don't know. Come have a chat to us after.
Thank you for the pizza.
Welcome, and the drinks.
Great, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm all right, I don't need that. Greg Pearl from Edward Recruitment. A lot of you know me. If you don't know me, I purely focus on data science recruitment at all levels. So if you have any questions about the marketplace, what's happening, what sort of jobs are out there, I've got lots of jobs on at the moment, but I'm also have a lot of very strong candidates, both at the junior, mid and senior level around machine learning, NLP, the whole gamut. So please come and talk to me if you'd like to either look for a job or look for your next star person. And while I'm still here, we've got Troy and Kate who are videoing this evening. NWorld sponsor by the video. The videos go on the Data Science Sydney YouTube site. There's a plethora of past speakers. And this one will go up in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
So the event finishes at 8:30, so if you can please hand in your passes to the passes box as you exit, that would be much appreciated.
We'll probably start at the beginning of the meeting, we will do it.
Or else.
Okay, I go next because I have a microphone. So when I'm not doing the Data Science Sydney meetup, I'm organizing the Sydney Users Art Forum meetup. And we are looking for speakers for our next meetups. So if you are interested in talking about a project that you have used art or some new package or some new tool or anything relevant to the art community, so get in touch with me. We have a very interesting next talk by Alan Nugent there, who will on 9th of June talk about a machine learning framework that he has built. Any more announcements? No? Okay. Then thank you for your attendance. I hope you have enjoyed the meeting. It has been useful, entertaining, and you have learned something new. Yeah. See you in the next one.